Hi. So I'm a 29-year-old woman and I was dating Mark, name changed, when I was in college. That was almost 10 years ago. We broke up after dating for 2 years because he'd hooked up with another girl, and we haven't been in touch since then. Mark and I did get pretty serious while we were dating. We'd decided that we would move in together after we graduated, and then, as soon as we'd saved up enough, we'd get married. So we were definitely in it for the long run, but after we broke up, Mark told all our friends that we were in an open relationship because we wanted to keep things casual, so what he did doesn't really count as cheating. He was a terrible person, and I realize that now, but oh well, we all make mistakes. A few years after that, I heard that he moved to Europe. And that was the last I heard of him. Recently, he reached out to me through Facebook, and it really took me by surprise because we haven't spoken in over 10 years, so there was literally no way I would have expected him to text me out of the blue this way. This happened 2 weeks ago, and the text essentially mentioned that he was ready to give our relationship a second chance now, and that he regrets the way things ended between us. He said he'd moved back here recently and was ready to leave his whole life back in London just so that he could be with me. I had no idea how to respond to any of that back at the time since, like I said, it had been 10 whole years. Mark and I were quite in love back then, but I didn't want anything to do with him right now. I also knew that Mark was not the kind of guy who would want to be with me just because he'd suddenly realized that he was in love with me or whatever. Mark had always been very ambitious, and so his life in Europe was what meant the world to him. I knew that he'd always wanted to live in London, since that's where his dad stayed and he'd go there for vacations as a kid. His parents were divorced and his dad would take him to London with him during the holidays every single year until he passed away, right before Mark was supposed to start college. He was in a very emotionally vulnerable phase of his life when he met me, and I was there for him throughout, so for him to even suggest that he would leave his life back in London and be with me instead told me that something was really off about whatever was happening right now. He'd never been the self-sacrificial type of guy, and it seemed very unlikely that he'd suddenly changed. So I decided to do some digging to find out what was really going on. I talked to all of his old friends, but most of them still thought that he was back in London, which meant that he hadn't even told his friends, so it was pointless to ask them. My only other option was to go through his social media accounts, but I'd blocked him back when we broke up and hadn't unblocked him since then. The Facebook account he'd used to text me was a brand new one and didn't tell me anything about him. I asked some friends of mine to go through his photos and stuff on Facebook, but even there I couldn't find anything suspicious. Most of it was just pictures of London, his office, and food. There was no trace of his family, if he had any. I was beginning to think that he was actually trying to get back with me, but then my friend told me that she thought she'd found his wife's account. My friend had actually combed through his entire friend list to find something that could tell us more about his life, God bless her heart. And she'd struck gold when she found that there was an account with a wedding photo as the profile picture, and Mark was standing beside the woman in his wedding tuxedo, smiling as widely as he could. I took a chance, made an account using a fake name, and added her. And luckily she accepted it, because I guess the account felt real enough. I went through her account and realized that Mark didn't just have a flourishing career back in London, but a happy family as well. They seemed happy at the very least. He was married to this woman and had been married for at least 8 years. He also had 2 sons aged 5 and 3. I couldn't make out for the life of me why he would text me now, especially when he had a family. He had a wife and 2 kids back in London, and yet he was willing to cheat on them, again. It didn't even seem as if they were in the middle of a divorce or whatever, because his wife had been posting family photos of them even when I found her account. So his wife certainly had no idea. Things just continued to get more and more confusing the more I thought about it, so I decided to respond to his message instead and just meet him, hoping that at least that would give me some answers. I responded to his message 3 days after he'd sent it, and said that I was ready to meet him, so he set a date for a week later and added that he was still very much in love with me. He told me he was glad that I was finally coming back to him because with each other is where we belong. And then he told me something that finally helped me make sense of everything. He asked me to bring the bracelet that he'd gifted me on our first anniversary. It was studded with green stones all over it and was a beautiful bracelet. He hadn't told me much about it except for the fact that his mother had given that to him for his special one. So, we were definitely serious. I finally realized that this was the reason he was here, to retrieve it. But I still needed to know more, so I finally gave in and messaged his wife on Facebook and told her everything. I had no other alternative either, since it was pretty obvious that something weird was happening here. I didn't even know if his wife was going to believe me or not, but I just had to find out. So I texted her, told her everything that Mark had texted me and my history with him, and waited for her response. I didn't think she was going to get back to me because I was texting her through a fake account, so why would she even take me seriously? But she did, surprisingly. She got back to me and told me that she was ready to believe me, but she needed proof. So I sent her some old photos of me and Mark, back from when we were in college, where it was pretty apparent that we were in a relationship. I also told her things that only people close to Mark would know, so that she'd know I wasn't bluffing, and only then did she finally believe me. We exchanged numbers so that we could talk, and I finally got to know what was going on. Mark's wife, Eva, was actually the girl who he'd been cheating on me with back when we were in college. She'd moved here for a few years, but she was originally from London, and I guess that's what attracted him to her. She had no idea that he was already in a relationship when she started seeing him, and up until now, she didn't know about me, even though she'd had her doubts. More recently, she found out from her mother-in-law, Mark's mom, about the bracelet. Apparently, the greenstones are real emeralds and are of great value. His mother happened to mention it to her while they were talking, and said that she'd given it to him after Mark's father's death so he could give it to whoever he decided to marry, just to cheer him up. But then she didn't know where it was now, since Mark claims that he lost it. So when she brought it up with Mark, they got into a bit of a fight, and without resolving it, he left for what he said was a business trip back home. She'd suspected that there were some things that Mark was hiding from her, and of late, those suspicions had just been getting stronger, which is why she'd responded to my text in the first place. He was definitely here to get that bracelet back so that he'd finally have some answers to Eva's questions. I think he'd either been too embarrassed to be caught cheating, or maybe he just hadn't known the value of the bracelet back then, which is why he hadn't asked me to return it, and even I hadn't thought much of it since I had no idea those were real emeralds. I did keep it with me, thankfully, but it wasn't kept aside safely, and I'd just kept it in my box of college stuff that I had. So as soon as I learned about it, I dug that up and have kept it with me ever since. I know he's here to take that bracelet back because that's the only tangible thing that links us together, and if his wife were to find out about it, she'd divorce him, and that'd be the end of his life in London, since she was the one who brought him with her so that he could work at her uncle's company. His entire life was based on his wife never getting to know about his past relationship, but unfortunately, it was too late for him to save his marriage now. Both Eva and I knew the truth about him, and I felt awful for her because the poor girl had given him everything he needed, and it still wasn't enough for him. He'd been ready to cheat on her just to get that bracelet back. It was kind of ironic that he was willing to cheat to actually save his marriage and the life he'd built for himself. I myself wasn't very emotionally invested in the situation since Mark and I had ended 10 years ago, but I felt really bad for Eva. The woman had called me and cried for 20 minutes after we'd uncovered the truth, and I didn't even know what to say to her. I'd been through this with Mark when he'd cheated on me, but this was 10 times worse. She had kids with this man, for God's sake. I can't even imagine how awful she must have felt when she found out. If it was bad enough to make her cry in front of the woman her husband had been involved with earlier, then, well, I'd say it was pretty freaking bad. I just couldn't bring myself to accept the fact that Mark was hurting another woman for his own selfish reasons. All the pain and betrayal I'd suppressed 10 years back began to come back to the surface, and I decided to convince Eva to fly down here to give Mark the shock of his life. He deserved it, after all. He'd ruined the poor woman's life, just like he'd tried to ruin my life all those years ago, and so I told her that she needed to fly down here as soon as she could so she could confront her scumbag husband. It took a little effort, but I finally managed to convince her that this would be worth it, and 2 days before my date with Make, she landed up at my house. It was strange to see the woman Mark had cheated on me with after a whole decade, but I'd made my peace with it, and now it was time to teach this horrible man a lesson for whatever he's been up to. So I was as warm and welcoming as possible and tried to comfort her. She ended up telling me a lot about Mark as well. She admitted that she'd always had a nagging feeling that he didn't really love her, and was more attracted to the fact that she was from London. His mother would have been really hurt if he'd just decided to move on his own, so he needed an excuse, and Eva was exactly what he needed. He wasn't very expressive about his love, and even when he was with the kids, she felt as if he wasn't very connected to his own family. She'd tried her best to trust him and believe him when he said that he loved her and his kids, but honestly, it felt like he just liked being the vice president of a company in London, just like his dad used to be. I'd always known how Mark was really attached to London and his dad, and how much he admired the man, but I don't think his dad would have liked the way he got to the position he is now through lies and manipulation. It's just sad that he felt the need to do all of this. He could have been honest with his mother, and could have actually worked hard to get to that sort of position instead of just relying on his wife's connections. But that's Mark for you. He never had any morals or ethics, and seems like he never developed any later on in life either, but I'm glad that at least Eva was aware of how he was using her now, so we decided that I'd speak to Mark and ask him the time and place of our date, and then Eva would be the one who shows up. I'd be out there waiting for her, though, just in case Mark flips out on her or whatever. It's unlikely, since his entire life is based on her forgiveness and kindness, but there's no telling what a man like him is capable of. We're supposed to meet tomorrow, and I'm having last-minute jitters because I know literally none of this is my business. I know Mark and I used to date, but it's been over a decade since that, and now I'm ruining his life, and possibly his kids as well because of what I'm about to do. I don't know if this is just me being irrationally anxious or whatever, but I just want to make sure that I'm in the right here. AIA for trying to ruin my ex's marriage and life 10 years after our breakup because he got in touch with me recently. Update 1. We did it. It was crazy and I have so much to share, but the bottom line is that we freaking did it. I still can't believe that we pulled this off, and it's actually kind of thrilling and relieving at the same time. I finally feel like I got the closure I deserved 10 years ago. And of course, I saved Eva from spending a couple more years in a toxic and loveless marriage, so that's a bonus as well. But before coming to what happened, I'll just answer a few questions that most of you seemed to have. How did I find out that he was cheating? One of my friends sent me a picture of him at a football game with his arms around another girl, the same football game that he refused to go with me to since he was very sick. So that was the end of our 2-year relationship. I sent him that picture, dumped him through text, and never spoke to him again. That's it. As for the bracelet, I really don't know why his mother didn't tell him about the emeralds earlier. It seems like a really important detail to have missed out on, but his mother's a strange person. She's always been sort of eccentric, and I hate to say it, but I don't think she's all there, which was a major part of the reason why Mark was so desperate to get away from her in the first place. But lucky for us, his mother didn't reveal the thing about the emeralds until now. Also, I must have forgotten to mention this, but the reason we waited to meet for 1 whole week was because I'd requested it. That was not his decision to make. These were the things that most of you wanted to know about, so I'm hoping all the questions are answered now. Coming to what actually happened. We drove to the restaurant that he'd picked, and I could see him sitting in there through the window, working on his laptop. I sent Eva in, and as soon as she entered and he looked up, I saw his face drop, and even on the outside it looked hilarious. I could barely hear a thing, but I saw them arguing, where he looked really apologetic, and Eva was totally chewing him out. After a few minutes, she threw the coffee he'd ordered right at his face and walked out while he spluttered and struggled to wipe his face, while Eva came back out, sat in my car, and we left. I didn't hear much of the confrontation, but it was like watching a silent film, and honestly, it was the best damn film I've ever watched. Of course, Eva told me what went down after we got home, and I can't even imagine Mark having the audacity to actually defend himself after this crap. When she walked in, his first instinct was to ask her why she was there, and tried to gaslight her into believing that she was being too nosy and he wasn't even doing anything wrong. I don't know how he has the audacity to say any of that after what he's done, but as soon as he tried to defend himself, Eva lost it and, like I said, she schooled him. The first thing she's going to do once she goes back to London is file for a divorce and full custody of her children. I've also given her all the proof that I could accumulate, and I'm hoping that it actually helps her. I haven't received any text or call from Mark yet, so I'm guessing that he knows that I was involved, because otherwise Eva literally never would have found out. I'm hoping that he stays away from us after this, because I really don't need any more drama. This has been enough adrenaline for a lifetime. Also, thanks for being so kind to me and asking me to be safe. The messages were really sweet, you guys. Update 2. Lol, Eva is supposed to fly back to London tomorrow, and Mark just texted her a huge apology, claiming that he's realized his mistake and feels like he should have been honest with her from the get-go instead of trying to cover up his lies like an idiot. I'm glad he realizes that now, but I think it's a bit too late for that. Neither of us thinks he's being honest even now, because his text just reeks of desperation. Nowhere did he mention that he doesn't want to lose custody of his kids, but he did say that he doesn't want to start from scratch regarding his career. He tried to defend his involvement with me, saying that the only reason he'd even reached out to me was so that he could get that bracelet back to its rightful owner, so technically, whatever he did was just to save his marriage. It was kind of pathetic to watch him struggle so hard just so that he could continue to live the luxurious lifestyle that he's grown accustomed to without even bothering to care about the people he's been hurting. I mean, hurting your wife on purpose is one thing. She's an adult and she can take life's knocks, but hurting your own kids? That's just unforgivable. And I really am happy that I went through with my plan and did what I did. He'd broken my heart once, and it had taken me a really long time to recover from that. So I'm glad that I didn't let him carry on with this any further than he already had. He deserves the worst, and there's nothing worse than having it all and then losing it because of a single bad decision, and he's going to realize that now. Eva is very determined to leave him and make sure that he ends up with absolutely nothing in the divorce, and I'm really hoping that she's able to achieve that. She and her kids deserve better. They deserve someone who will actually be able to give them the love that they need, and isn't just there for the money and the position that comes with his marriage to Eva. I wish the best for her. Update 3. Hey guys. It's been close to a month since the last update, and I've been really caught up with work, so I haven't had the time to share updates. Anyway, a few days after Eva left, Mark texted me yet again and accused me of being a jealous and resentful B-word who ruined his life just because I couldn't stand the fact that I was more successful than him. It was hilarious, since he was the one who had used his wife and her connections to even land a job and get to where he is today, and then lost all that as well, whereas I'm still working hard all on my own and have a flourishing career to look forward to. He literally has nothing that I'd be jealous of, no job, no family, and nobody who loves him. I sent him a text telling him exactly what I thought of him and his little manipulation tactic. I told him that he could rot in hell for all I cared. Then I blocked him and even changed my phone number for good measure, even though I knew he wouldn't be able to find me no matter how hard he tried to. Eva filed for divorce as soon as she got back to London, and we've kept in touch since then, even though we don't talk every day. She's kept me updated, and has even told me about Mark's stupid decision to contest the divorce petition. I don't know what exactly he hopes to get out of that, because he already knows that Eva has all the proof of what he'd done behind her back. If I were in his place, then I would have just tried to beg her for forgiveness instead of fighting her, because his situation is quite desperate. He hasn't even tried to fight for the custody of his kids, which is just so sad. But I'm glad that those kids will never have to deal with an awful dad like him. And the bracelet, well, it's with me. Mark didn't bother to ask for it, and Eva didn't want it, so I gotta keep it. Maybe I'm not the rightful owner of it, but I think I'm gonna keep it, lol. I did try to offer it to Eva, but she said I deserved it for even putting up with Mark and encouraging her to confront him. So I'm done with all of that now, and I hope that now I can finally move on and never look back.